joint work between me and my BA student of the University of Brasilia, Henrique Salviano Fernandes. Okay, what is the objective of the article? This article investigates the relationship between fiscal multipliers and disguised unemployment in Brazil, focusing on the effectiveness of expansionary fiscal policies in scenarios of labor underutilization. Based on a literature review for calculating disguised unemployment in Brazil and application of a vector autoregressive model, the impact of fiscal shocks on GDP in the rates of open and disguised unemployment are analyzed. The existence of disguised unemployment in Brazil, particularly in the traditional services sector, is confirmed. Additionally, the results indicate that investment shocks and other expenditures present the highest positive fiscal multipliers, while payroll expenditures have a negative impact. Finally, the analysis also highlighted that fiscal policies aimed at increasing income transfers may be a viable path to reducing disguised unemployment. Okay. So let's talk a little about the theoretical foundations. The first one, which is the Latin American structuralism of A. Clark. Two concepts. The first one is heterogeneous structural heterogeneity and productive specialization of peripheral economies. According to Howard Pradesh, the paper of 1949, the so-called Latin American Manifesto, peripheral economies had a production structure that at the same time heterogeneous and specialized. Structural heterogeneity means that there are huge differences of labor productivity between sectors of the economy, mainly the substantial traditional sector and the modern or capitalist sector.
Just a second, we have to share the presentation. Since we have to use another computer.
No problem. There may be two Marvels. Two Marvels. One in your clone. Or you in the parallel universe. Now it's okay? Okay. Just reduce this. Yeah, please. Technology.
Yeah, it's helping us, as you can see.
Okay, thank you. So, regarding theoretical foundations, one main concept is structural heterogeneity and productive specialization of peripheral economies. According to Howard Pradesh paper of 1949, the so-called Latin American Manifesto, peripheral economies have a production structure that is at the same time heterogeneous and specialized. Structural heterogeneity means that there are huge differences of labor productivity between sectors of the economy, mainly between the substantial traditional sector and the modern or capitalist sector. Productive specialization means that peripheral economies are inserted in the international division of labor as a primary goods exporters. And the concept that Julie Warini do not like, but is underdevelopment. Underdevelopment means the coexistence of a manufacturing sector that had already reached a high degree of diversification and has a participation in output that is little different from that observed in developed countries, with a typically capitalist employment structure in which a large part of its population is all away to the benefits of economic development. This is the definition of the Brazilian economist Celso Furtado in his book of 1961. Well, second theoretical foundations, Keynesian macroeconomics. The theoretical concept is the fiscal multipliers. Since output and employment are constrained by effective demand, even in the long run, fiscal policy may be required to generate the highest level of employment possible given the supply side constraints of the economy. Fiscal multipliers are a measure of the impact over aggregate demand and output on an increase in government expenditures. It is important to notice that recent developments of the fiscal multiplier literature had shown that the magnitude of multiplier depends on the type of government expenditure, which could be public investment, social transfers, payrolls, and other expenditures, as well as the level of evenness of capacity and employment utilization. Fiscal policy is, in general, more effective when the fiscal stimulus is done by public investment and the economy is not near a supply constraint. Well, this is some data about specifically the Brazilian economy, which I call the puzzle of the Brazilian labor market economy, which means a middle-income economy with a huge subsistence sector. As you can see in table number 1, the informal employment responds to more than 55% of the total employment in the economy, and the self-employed is almost 13%. So when we add the informal employment and the self-employment, we have almost 40% of all labor force working in what can be considered a subsistence sector. This is what an underdeveloped economy means. Okay, well, can we do a synthesis between both concepts? Yes, with the idea of disguised unemployment. In a dual economy, with a low productivity and a high productivity sector, a fall of effective demand will reduce the level of employment of the modern sector. Due to the inexistence or low coverage of unemployment benefits, workers that are fired from the modern sector has no other alternative instead of looking for a living in the subsistence or low productive sector of the economy. Since the sector is not constrained by effective demand, these workers will get a job, so-called job, at the low productivity activities and will not be counted in the official unemployment statistics. But as soon as they are able to get a job at the modern sector, they will leave the subsistence sector, showing that jobs in this sector was not a choice, but an involuntary situation caused by a decrease in labor demand at the modern sector. Well, Brazil and disguised unemployment. The phenomenon of disguised unemployment is a scarce and explored but interesting concept about the workings of the labor market with profound implications for economic development. While the traditional unemployment rates can capture a portion of the unemployed people, disguised unemployment also includes those who, through the dynamic of the labor market, work in extremely unproductive or low-quality employment situations. In the Brazilian context, the use of disguised unemployment as a proxy for economic performance is justified by the need for a more comprehensive and representative measure of the labor market. It is assumed that traditional indicators may underestimate the true extent of unemployment and therefore compromise the formulation of appropriate public policies. By incorporating disguised unemployment as an indicator of the situation of the labor market, a more comprehensive view of the country's labor reality sought, allowing for a more accurate analysis of economic cycle and consequently providing a clear perception of the impact of fiscal policies. Okay, there are 5 types of fiscal multiplier. I will not extend too much because it's common knowledge on the literature, but we have the impact multiplier, the horizon multiplier, the peak multiplier, the cumulative multiplier, and the cumulative multiplier at present value. A brief review of the literature on fiscal multipliers. For purpose of literature review, the focus will be on studies based on VAR model and its evolution. A pioneer studying the analysis of the multiplier is Blanchard and Perotti. These authors empirically characterize the effects of changes in government spending and taxes on production using structure vector autoregressive models with identification restriction. In short, the study observes approximate peak multipliers between 0.9 and 1.3 for public spending, and between minus 0.8 and minus 1.3 for taxes. Certainly, the most controversial restriction of the model is that any government spending not predicted by other variables could be considered an exogenous shock, the validity of which has been questioned several times in subsequent studies. Therefore, other techniques are created to get around the problem of identification. In the case of Mumford and Newland, in addition to introducing the concept of cumulative multiplier after present value, the authors use a sign restriction to limit impulse response correlations. The cumulative multipliers at present value are 2.07 for spending and minus 4.54 for taxes. Okay. The financial crisis. The 2008 financial crisis renewed interest in fiscal multipliers as global economies began to implement fiscal policy as a central instrument to combat recession. It's from this context that Hall brings an extensive debate of the factors that can impact the size of the multipliers. These factors include the shape of consumption function, the dynamics of labor market, the persistence of public spending, and, as my colleague Manalpini's contribution, the composition of fiscal policy. Well, this much I will skip that. Well, for us, what really matters is fiscal multipliers along business cycles. Another methodological innovation came from Ochmar and Gorodnichenko, who explore how output responses to fiscal policies vary over the economic cycle using a movable model with smooth transition. Unlike the traditional approach of Blanchard and Bertin, which assumed constant multipliers, they found that multipliers of public spending change significantly between recessions and expansions. Furthermore, by breaking down the types of spending, they found that public investments have multipliers of over 2 in recessions, much higher than other multipliers. This findings emphasize that fiscal multipliers are more robust in periods of low economic activity, providing a solid basis for expansionary fiscal policies in times of recession. Well, I'll skip this Brazilian literature on fiscal multipliers. Basically, but I will talk a little about recent Brazilian literature on fiscal multipliers. Brazilian literature began to use new tools from international literature to achieve increasingly well-founded conclusions. As a result, the focus has shifted to studies of the second group, multipliers along the phase of business cycles and by spending category. Peter, my colleague Manalpini's used the nonlinear model to estimate fiscal multiplier dependent on economic cycle, analyzing the period from the second quarter of 1996 to the fourth quarter of 2012. And he found public investment multipliers between 1.4 and 1.7, and net tax burden had multipliers between minus 0.2 and minus 0.2. Okay. Well, I'll skip a little that. Okay. How to measure this guy's unemployment? This article aims to calculate the fiscal multiplier, take a stand for the situation of the labor market, not only the official unemployment, but also the disguised unemployment and assess the impact of fiscal shock in the official and disguised unemployment rates in Brazil. To do this, the disguised unemployment rate will be estimated using the methodology of Astril and Newgate, which is adapted to reflect in particular of the Brazilian case. The author defines disguised unemployment as employment in very low productivity sectors, a characterization that will also be applied to this study. To classify a traditional sector as unproductive, the sector's per worker productivity must be less than 80% of that found in the country's manufacturing sector. Okay. This is the bounds of Astril and Newgate for the economies of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, United Kingdom, and United States. So we can apply the same exercise to Brazil. To obtain productivity data per worker, we use the same methodology as productivity indicator per worker, available as part of a series from the Hedges Bonelli Productivity Observatory FGV IBRI. The indicator is subdivided into 12 main sectors of the Brazilian economy, with data on value added taken from the quarterly national accounts and employer population by sector from the continuous national household census survey. This is a basic restriction of data to our model because this study started in 2012. Okay. For the purpose of this study, the following sectors will be analyzed: agriculture, manufacturing, construction, services, and production services. Unlike the service sector, which covers all service sectors in the country, the traditional service sector disregards subsectors related to financial, insurance, real estate, and information activities. Well, here we have the relative productivity of these sectors compared to the manufacturing sectors, the evolution. And here we have the calculation of this rise of unemployment in agriculture, construction, and traditional services. As you can see, after 2021, only traditional sector has this rise of unemployment. And this is the evolution of official unemployment in blue, this rise of unemployment in red, and true unemployment is the sum of both. Okay. Then we made our model using the true unemployment as a proxy for the situation in the labor markets. And yes, I have to skip the methodology, estimation methodology, but it's a model. So what we found, this value is for the impact peak, horizontal and cumulative multipliers for transfer, payroll, other expenses, and investment. As you can see, the fiscal multiplier of investment expenditure is much higher than other types of government expenditures, and then we calculate the effect of each increase in government expenditures of open and true unemployment. And then we conclude that the results indicate that the true unemployment rate is more sensitive to fiscal shocks than the open unemployment rate, reflecting more clearly the variations caused by different types of government spending. While shocks to transfers and other spending tend to reduce both unemployment rates, these effects are not pronounced at the true rates, suggesting that it responds more directly to these stimuli. On the other hand, shocks to payrolls and investments cause a significant long-term increase only in the variable unemployment rate, highlighting the divergence in the impact of these expenditure activities on the labor market. Therefore, to promote reductions in unemployment, both open and disguised transfers appear to be the best option among the expenditures category analyzed. This is strange, in fact. Increasing government investment raising disguised unemployment may be due to the fact that such investments increase the labor demand in the construction sector, which have a considerably lower labor productivity than manufacturing sector, thereby increasing disguised unemployment, although official unemployment rate is being reversed. So, as my final remarks, the econometric results indicate that the magnitude of the fiscal multiplier in Brazil, as well as the impact of unemployment rates, varies considerably according to the type of government expenditure, with the overall impact on true unemployment being greater than observed for open unemployment. This findings were built on hypothesis that public investment can be a source of economic growth, while income transfers stand out as an alternative for fighting unemployment. Overall, this article contributes to the the teacher by demonstrating that in economies with structural progenity, as in the case of Brazil, where the labor market is characterized by high informality and under-utilization of workforce, this guy's unemployment should be considered as an important variable in the formulation of public policies. The use of measures that consider the reallocation of labor between traditional and modern sectors can provide a new perspective for formulating more effective fiscal policies aimed at both growth and improving the working conditions of the country. Well, many thanks.
Your paper. So some few observations. The first one is that I found very interesting and maybe of inspiration for other studies, the fact that you went back to Astril and Milgate, the definition of disguised unemployment. I think that's an interesting, approach, although of course to be thought about. Especially since your empirical results are not very clear. First of all, they're not, I think in most cases, they're not statistically significant, which makes it doubtful whether we can, really talk about the science if there is no, I don't know what range of statistical significance you consider, but that's a huge problem, of course. And so maybe some refinement of your analysis, perhaps along the line of making a stricter definition of the informal sector. I don't know, of the disguised unemployment. The other reason, perhaps, I'm not sure, of course, is to be checked for this strange or non-significant results, is maybe there is to some extent an endogeneity of the labor force. So when you have an expansion or a contraction, the labor force also changes, and this may affect your measures of the unemployment or whatever unemployment, explicit or disguised, etc., or true, total. So maybe I think what it really, and also the signs are not always clear. Now you provided a possible explanation of the negative sign for public investment, but you often find these negative signs which are not easy to digest, let's say. So, interesting work, but I think you still need to refine the empirical part, or at least to interpret your results in a convincing way. Please. 1, 2, 3.
Split.
Then you split. Yes, yes. Still services. No.
Quelli sono i servizi avanzati. Dall'altra riga. So, no, hai ragione. Traditional services. I traditional sono i viola.
Yeah. So one of your aims is to see what happens if there are changes in fiscal policy or formality. And this is the technical limits for plus, right? So I was guessing, is it possible to control quality like that? So maybe you have like a very simple model that I must check. Is it available and then some measurable to find? They have different measures of share of the set or whatever it's balance.
My question is, follow up to this passage by like the following. If you have, I was, as you were talking, I was thinking, if you have expensive fiscal policy, I have reasons to believe that the informal sector would shrink, but I also have reasons to believe that the informal sector should expand. The informal sector would shrink by encouraging the mechanisms because the formal employment is increasing, the formal employment, then formal employment is increasing for leaving the informality in order to disguise anything formality. But at the same time, because there are formal and informal sector having connections, if everybody's income increases, the demand for the informal sector also increases. And maybe a very simple, I think, a pedagogical example to see that is construction, simple construction. When you get a job, a very simple job in the formal sector, which is important. People with low income, one of the first things they start to do is to build a new room with the house. And for that, they hire the lady.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
That is fully informal. That the data will not be formal sector, which the informal economy is paid at the end of the day in cash, is completely outside sector. So is an example why expensive fiscal policy also increasing formal for skies. And that could be part of the reason why
Can you use this? Otherwise, the people who are listening.
And that could be part of the, that's cool. May I use this when I present? This is very cool, yeah. And that might be part of the reason why the coefficients are not significant, because you have two mechanisms playing in opposite directions. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think that has to be. Other, I do not listen. Because I really
Sorry.
not listen.
So related to the second part, I'm very sorry, I will be very quick. But as a check, you can, so I've done a similar exercise in a model that was recently published, where we look at the effects on male and women, but I guess the procedure is the same. So you can look at the total effect on the total unemployed population, and then you can split this population into two, the formal, the true unemployed and the rest, to check if there are changes in the impulse response functions that then could explain the point raised by Mark.
Thank you very much, José Luis, for such an interesting question. I think that your paper, it's a comment and a suggestion, is that that you're making a contribution in terms of the dominant literature of fiscal multipliers, because most of them, at least in most of the papers, for instance, that we have been able to see during this day, is that basically the analysis are based on the fact that the size of the fiscal multiplier, and therefore the effectiveness or the impact of fiscal policy, depends basically on the kind of the type of public expenditures. It's independently, we are looking at, for instance, the economic classification. We divide, separate, for instance, fiscal transfers of public investment, public consumption, or it depends on the economic classification. We are talking of health, active labor market policies, education, and so on. But I think that the one of your main contribution is that what you are saying is that, or suggesting, is that it does not depend only on these factors, but also on the agents that are benefited from these expenditures. agents, I mean, in terms of papers, workers, economic sectors, and so on, that is a factor, or is an element that crucially affect to the final impact of the fiscal policy and the rise of the different items of public expenditure. Because perhaps one of your implications is that what you are saying implicitly is that the size of the fiscal multipliers depends drastically on some effects that are usually rejected or not taken into account. That are, for instance, the impact on income distribution. It depends on how it affects the distribution in the case, for instance, on how it affects to different employers, or for instance, to the composition on the sectoral composition of the economic activity. I think this is a very relevant point. Thank you.
May I?
Please, 1 minute.
Well, I think that maybe I do not be very clear about what is disguise and unemployment. Disguise and unemployment does not mean informal employment. Formal or informal employment can be just a question of tax evasion. You know, in Brazil, many liberal workers prefer to be informal in order to evade tax. But they work in sectors with very high labor productivity. I'm talking about lawyers, I'm talking about engineers, or even economists. So this is not the vibe that it matters for what I'm working here. What matters is the difference between productivity in sectors of the economy. So when one of my strange results is that when we have an increase in public investment, the disguise of unemployment increases is because in Brazil the construction sector, unlike what occurs in Europe and the United States, is a very low productivity sector. So when you increase public investment, you will increase construction, so you will increase the labor force that is working in the construction sector. But since the productivity in the construction sector is much lower than the productivity of the manufacturing sector, this means that the disguise of unemployment increases. That's the reason. And for us, and that's the basic difference of what was being discussed in the last section and what I'm discussing here. The Latin American economies are strictly heterogeneous economies. So we have very high productivity sectors and very low productivity sectors. So what the economy produces is relevant for economic growth. And also for formulating fiscal policy. So if we think in terms of impact over output, the best way is to increase public investment. But if you think in terms of reducing the structural heterogeneity of the economy, to reducing the disguise of unemployment, then your best policy fiscal action is to increase social transfers, is what the model is saying. Of course, you're right that due to the data restrictions that the PNAD only begins in 2012, of course, that the magnitude of the fiscal multipliers are not reliable. But there is still one exercise that we must have to do, is to test the model specification. We can have two model specifications. One is only official unemployment data, and the other specification with the true unemployment, in order to see if when you use a broader proxy for the unemployment, it changes or do not changes the values of the multipliers. That's, I think, is our basic guess.
Look at employment, whether it is increasing overall or not, because that's it's not just about unemployment that we want to, to have policies, but also for employment as such. Okay, let's quickly move to Davila Fernandez. Thank you very much. It's very interesting anyway. With the discussion.
Io voglio usare questo microfono, questo fancy, se posso. Esatto, io ho bisogno di camminare, sennò... Sai, il cerdo, infatti, tutte queste cose. Scherzo.
Lei lo discuss.
Okay, so. And then okay, starting 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, or should I say good evening, dear friends and colleagues. Thank you very much for having me today. The title of my presentation is Modeling Green Attitudes and Informality Along the North-South Divide. And I would like to start with these slides with a couple of pictures. I'm sure everybody recognizes this gentleman here on the bottom left. It's Marx, right? It's Keynes. And the gentleman here on the right, at least the Latin American friends in the audience should be able to recognize him, is Celso Furtado. Of course, here we have the Lorentz attractor, but maybe the person that is a little bit or might be new is the gentleman in the middle here. Can you recognize him? And most likely you can't, because the gentleman is my father. It's my father, but he has everything to do with my presentation today. Not only because he's behind some of the analytical results that I will present, but because he introduced me to Celso Furtado before any formal training in economics. When I started in the beginning of my undergraduate program, started studying economics, he gave me Economic Growth of Brazil by Celso Furtado. It's a classic, Formação Econômica do Brasil. And from Celso Furtado, I moved to Keynes. I discovered Keynes and a disequilibrium approach to macroeconomics, to growth. This is an equilibrium approach that is intrinsically nonlinear. So I really like this paper because not only because the economic content, but because personally I'm very attached to the ideas behind it. And as I said, everything starts with Furtado, with structuralism and the ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and Caribbean. And these scholars, they continue to try to present a comprehensive view of development processes that include growth, include structural change, income distribution, in a process that is intrinsically dynamic. So always highlighting this dynamic element. And a critical part of their analysis has always been, as Professor Herrero mentioned, structural heterogeneity, the question of the problem of the issue of the dual economy. And this is structural heterogeneity that has many dimensions. So you can think, for example, a demographic or geographical dimension. If you look at Brazil, most of the population live in the coast, and the middle of the country is a little bit empty. But you also have structural heterogeneity in terms of income distribution. The rich in Brazil are among the richest in the world. The poor in Brazil are among the poorest in the world. And something similar happens in Peru, Bolivia, Argentina. Of course, we also here have a matter of the sectoral composition of the economy, because economies like Brazil have companies that are technologically leaders in the world, like Embraer, Petrobras, but we also have a subsisting sector, high levels of informality coexisting with this high productivity sector. So the moment we kind of agree that it's possible to have multiple equilibria and development is not a linear process, I think the door opens to study the possibility of precisely multiple equilibria and study the basis of attraction. And I will try to explain a little bit more what I mean by that. But if I'm thinking about climate change, and this paper is about climate change, so I'm doing this huge detour to arrive to climate change. That is an additional dimension of structural heterogeneity that perhaps some of us downplay that I would like to bring to the table, that is heterogeneity in the way we think. And why I think that, and why this is important? Well, if we're thinking about climate change, scientists agree that climate change is real, it's human-made, we should do something about it. But then when you go to the general public, they seem to be divided between those that believe climate change is important and those that don't think it's a big thing. I call that heterogeneity in ecological thinking. I believe that's an issue because limiting global warming requires cohesion and coordination among the players of the economic system. And when we look at the literature on the topic on heterogeneity in ecological thinking, the existing scholarship is very problematic from our point of view because treats developed and emerging countries as systems occupying a linear development path. And that's problematic for the reasons that I mentioned before. Developing economies are structurally different. They have a huge informal sector. They are dual, intrinsically dual in nature. So just to try to give you a more concrete view of what I'm talking about, in terms of surveys like this, you have many, you find many in the literature. I'm using the World Risk Poll just because they interview people in around 140 countries, almost 150,000 people. If we look at the global north, so we have Europe and the United States, we kind of have this division between Europe and the United States in terms of ecological attitudes. Europe, in greener colors, is a lot more conscious than the United States when you have this division, Democrats, Republicans. Some people believe climate change is an hoax or something. Some believe it's real. But this division also appears in the global south. If we look at, for example, Latin America versus Asia, Asia in much darker brown, while South America is in green. And here's an index. This index goes between -1 and 1, and will be very useful for the model I will present in a couple of minutes. This index basically consists in the share of those that believe climate change is a very serious threat. In this case, in the case of this question, how serious a threat do you think climate change is? The share of those that answer yes, minus the rest of the population. So of course, if everybody says, yes, climate change is a big threat, you're doing 1 minus 0, so your index becomes 1. If everybody says, no, climate change is not a big threat, you're doing 0 minus 1, so your index goes to -1. If half of the population says is a threat, you're doing 50 minus 50, so you go to 0. You can be anywhere between -1 and 1. So the global north is divided. Somehow we have heterogeneity in ecological thinking in the global north, but we have heterogeneity in ecological thinking also in the global south. Now, what happens if we put together heterogeneity in ecological thinking and the dual economy problem? And that's what this graph is doing. So here in the horizontal axis, we have as before, green attitudes, our index phi between -1 and 1. In the horizontal axis, but in the vertical axis, we build a formality index. In the same way we built phi, we take the share of the formal employment minus the share of the informal employment. And then, of course, if everybody's formal, omega will be equal to 1, 1 minus 0. If everybody's informal, omega will be equal to -1 because you're doing 0 minus 1. If you have 50-50, 50 minus 50 is 0. So your labor force is equally divided between the formal and the informal sector. When we put our formality index together with our green attitudes, we have these 4 quadrants. The first quadrant in the blue region, we have countries in a desirable state. Most of your workers, most of your agents are in the formal sector, and people believe climate change is a big deal. In the third quadrant, we have this red area. Nobody should like to be there because you have high informality and people that don't believe climate change is real. Now, blue and red areas are kind of the intuitive, the traditional way of thinking about climate change. You think the rich care about climate change, the poor, they have other concerns. They don't really think about climate change. The blue and the red areas. That's the reasoning maybe behind constructions like the environmental cousins curve. Environmental cousins curve is telling when you're poor, you don't care about the environment. Then you grow, you pollute a lot, and then you start caring about the environment. So when you're rich, emissions start to go down. So the blue and the red areas are pretty intuitive. What is not intuitive is that we have countries in the gray areas. And we don't have few countries in the gray areas. We have a significant amount of countries, some very puzzling, like Bolivia, very high informality, and still people very conscious from an environmental point of view. So from our perspective, I mean, the role of the informal sector in development remains quite controversial. let alone the climate change problem. But the thing is that we know very little about the feedback mechanisms from the dual economy thing to the heterogeneity in ecological thinking. And what this paper will try to do, the story I will try to present, is precisely a tractable model, or as tractable as possible, a tractable framework to study the interplay between informality, the coexistence between formal and informal activities, and heterogeneity in ecological thinking, meaning the coexistence of people that believe and those that don't believe climate change is a serious threat. So I will not show you equations today. The paper has a couple of equations and a couple of propositions. If you're interested in analytical results, there is a working paper there somewhere in the internet. But I will try to emphasize the main narrative. So what is happening here? We have the two main dimensions of our model: informality, omega, between -1 and 1. And green attitudes, phi, that also goes between -1 and 1. So our story goes in the following way. Depending on which group wins in terms of green attitudes, you will choose a carbon tax. Just because if nobody thinks climate change is important, why should you adopt a carbon tax in the first place? So depending on the composition of the population in terms of green attitudes, you choose a carbon tax, society choose a carbon tax. But then a carbon tax, of course, is a cost, is a production cost. So firms respond to this carbon tax, to this increase in the cost of polluting, by increasing their search for energy-saving production techniques, or increasing their search for carbon-neutral production techniques. This means the technology is going to change. If technology is changing, production will change. Production, especially in the formal sector, will change. Now, depending on economic performance, you will have an outcome in terms of the composition of your economy between formal and informal activities. Pollution is a subproduct of production. So as you're producing for a given technology, you will be polluting a certain amount. Your emissions will influence your green attitudes, but not only your perception of climate change depends on the consequences of polluting, but also depend on the composition of your economy in terms of formal and informal sectors. And why is that? And try to emphasize this. I presented this paper a couple of days in the US, and every time I presented it in Europe, I try to emphasize this. When we think about the informal sector, I invite you to think about it as the person that sells cake in the bus stop to make a living. And when you think about the formal sector, then you can think about a factory, maybe. Okay, so informality it's really something closer to a subsisting sector. Un muratore che lavora nero per arrivare alla fine del mese. Okay, so our idea here is that if informality is very high, you have other concerns. Climate change maybe is a secondary issue. So an increase in the share of formal activities should have an impact in the way you perceive climate change as well. So I promise I will show you only these two equations. And the reason why I'm showing only these two equations, because these two equations show very precisely the 5 channels, the 5 transmission channels that I have in mind. And all our numerical exercise, the numerical analysis that I will present, will consist basically in shutting down all channels and turning on certain channels to understand which channel is driving which result. That's basically our approach here. So in terms of formality, the composition of the economy in terms of formal and informal activities, we differentiate between a scale effect and a growth effect. What is the growth effect telling us? The growth effect is telling us that if the economy grows, people prefer to work in the formal sector rather than in the informal sector. So if the economy grows, this increases the probability that a worker ends in the formal sector. And the scale effect is just telling you that if you're surrounded by people working in the informal sector, this increases the probability that you will also be informal. But if you're surrounded by people in the formal sector, this creates some sort of pressure also to work in the informal activities. Now, in terms of green attitudes, we differentiate between three effects. We have a climate threat that is just telling us that as you keep polluting, the consequences of climate change accumulate. And this, if we accept that people respond to a threat in a certain way, this will increase the probability that you will create some sort of climate awareness. Okay? The formalization effect is what I mentioned before. If the size of the formal sector is bigger, then people are not working selling cake anymore. They are working in a nice factory. They have pension. They have access to health. So they have time to think about climate change. And finally, the pure effect is just that if you live with Trump supporters, this kind of increases the probability that you will not believe in climate change. But if Greta Thunberg is your neighbor, this increases the probability that maybe you will believe in climate change. So when we put all these ingredients together, we get to a dynamical system. Is a two-dimensional map. But let me jump to our numerical exercise, and we calibrate the model following values that you can find in the literature. So in the paper, we have a table directing the reader to, for each parameter, what is the justification for that value, where we find that value in the literature. So we shut up the scale and the group effects. So let me go here. We shut down the pure effect, and we shut down the scale effect, and we leave only formalization, climate threat, and growth. Okay, we call these three channels the cross repercussion channels. So if we do that, the only two possible, we have three equilibria. The only two stable equilibria are the green formal and the non-green informal. So what we're basically telling the reader is that if there are no peer effects and no scale effects in the context of our model, the only two possible solutions are the common sense solutions, the common wisdom solutions. The rich cares about the environment, the poor don't care about the environment. And the red area is just showing you all the initial conditions that lead to the non-green informal economy. The blue area marks all initial conditions that lead to the green formal equilibrium point. How much time do I have?
5 minutes.
6? No, 5 minutes is more than enough. Yeah, no, it's more than enough. So as a second step, we said, okay, let's open the scale and group effect channels and shut down the others. Okay, so the other three channels, we're shutting them down, and we're leaving just the scale and group effect sufficiently strong. In that case, we have 4. The model has 9 equilibria, but only 4 are stable. And we think this is an important result because all 4 equilibria correspond to the 4 quadrants that we saw in a picture in the beginning of my presentation. So here we have coexistence of attractors. Initial conditions is a weak representation of path dependence because initial conditions matter for where your economy is going. If you start in the attracting region in the blue area, you will end up eventually in a developed state where people are environmental conscious. But if you start in the attracting area of this gray on the 4th quadrant, then you will end up in an equilibrium where your economy is mainly formal, but it's not environmentally conscious, and so on and so forth for the red and the gray area in the second quadrant. So the model kind of reproduce somehow the evidence, stylized facts that we can find in this literature. Now, from a policy perspective, we start to think: is it possible to increase the area? The blue area, because everybody should be in the blue area, or would like to be in the blue area, because the moment you get in the blue area, this means that initial condition will lead you to a more desirable state. So, and what should we avoid in order to the red area not to increase or to be as small as possible? So, in our next experiment, we said, okay, the carbon tax. It's not like policymakers are all the time hearing what the general public believes. Part of the carbon tax responds to what technocrats think. So the European Union, we have the European Commission. In China, you have the Communist Party. Maybe in a small country like Bolivia, you're part of a certain international agreement. That international agreement is binding, and you have to implement a certain tax, even if you agree or not with that tax. So if you introduce an autonomous carbon tax, what happens is that we destroy one of the gray areas, and we kind of increase the attracting region of the good equilibria. So this is kind of a defense for the implementation of a carbon tax that doesn't react to what the general public believes. Okay, and for a country that starts in the red area, this presents the following. I don't know if debate is the right word, but the strategy, the choice of development strategies. We have here, a country that starts in the red area could debate what is the best development strategy. You could either develop increase formality first and then care about the environment, which will require 2 shocks. one shock to jump from red to gray vertically, and one shock to jump horizontally from gray to blue. Two big push a la Hirschman, like classical development. But climate change, climate agenda, the green agenda creates an opportunity, a development opportunity window, because if instead of moving first right, up and then right, you move first right, then as long as there is an autonomous carbon tax component, you already fall in the blue area, and this opens the possibility to eventually end up in a more desirable state. On the other hand, no, I don't have that slide here. Okay, so we also have in the paper what happens if you adopt a carbon subsidy instead of a carbon tax. And you have a carbon subsidy, the red area increases, actually. 1 minute is more than enough. If we couple together the carbon tax with growth, if you have enough growth, then we're able to get rid of all the other equilibrium. We have all initial conditions leading to the desirable blue state, and this just highlights the importance of growth in our analysis. So just some final considerations in the last 2 minutes, the last minute that I have today. Climate change, in my opinion, is the greatest challenge of our generation, and classical authors like Lewis, like the Clark, they are more relevant than ever because the duality problem is still there, persists. What we try to do here is to use discrete choice, a theory, a very relatively simple model, combining 5 channels to show how heterogeneity in ecological thinking interacts with the duality problem along the global north, global south divide. And in the paper, we try to provide a discussion, and maybe we could engage in this discussion here too, or maybe over coffee, on the different strategies for a green big push of a la Hirschman, or if a big push, an environmental big push is something worth to discuss. So thank you very much. I hope I was on time. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Marvio. Well, I think that the concept of structural heterogeneity that you use is ill-used in your paper. In page 2, you say, written, given that only the formal sector is assumed to pollute, well, this is not true. And I will say why. First, we have to have in mind what is the problem that we have at our hand. Climate change is basically made by the emission of GHG gases. In the so-called global south, a term that I do not like because Australia and New Zealand are in the south hemisphere, okay? But in the global south, such for instance as in Brazil, the main source of GHG emission is not manufacturing activities, is not construction activities, is not even generation of electricity, is basically change in land use, which means deforestation. Deforestation in Brazil is highly, not only an informal activity, but is a criminal activity. So the idea that the pollution, which for me means emission of GHG gases, is only created by the formal sector of the economy is not true. For the global south, the informal sector is the whole problem, has the lion's share of the problem of climate change. So for Brazil to make his task in terms of achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement, what we have to stop is deforestation, which is not a formal activity, a formal economic activity. And as well occurred in Brazil, occurred in other countries as Indonesia or other Latin American economies, so on and so forth. And my second observation is, again, as I made previously in my exposition, do not confuse formality or informality with structural heterogeneity. structural heterogeneity is not defined by the legal status of a job. You can have a very high productive job and you can be informal, okay? But heterogeneous, structural heterogeneity means that there are huge differences of productivity levels between economic sectors. And my last observation, you try to combine two strands of literature, which is Latin American structuralism with agent-based models. Well, can be done, maybe, but you have to take an observation that for Latin American structuralism does not matter if individuals are different. What matters is the structure of production. Okay, so the structures are important, the differences in structures, not difference between individuals. So people, is of course that people are different, they can have different thoughts, but this is not what really matters for Latin American structuralism. What matters is difference in the structures of society, of economies. Take, for instance, the answer that Cowder gives to Pasinetti in 1966, when Cowder finally answered to Pasinetti, because Pasinetti told that Cowder make a logical slip in his 1956 paper, and Cowder said, well, I think that Mr. Pasinetti do not understand what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the difference between classes of people, but I'm talking in difference about class of rents, of income. So the high propensity, high save propensity out of profits and low propensity to save out of wages is because the institutional differences, not because of personal differences in terms of saving behavior. Okay, that's my...
comment that is very interesting in the topic, but I invite you to more analyze in depth the conceptual aspect that link informality sector and green attitude. Probably is not very stressed the channel through which is possible to connect these two different why is interesting, and because sometimes you use the term of poor and rich, but poor rich is another question. No, to say that probably could be very interesting, but could be interesting also to express exactly the channels through which is important this kind of relationship.
Sure.
For him? Okay.
No, just a curiosity, because this is the second time I listened to the presentation. I always enjoy it very much. In the map, it occurred to me that Nordic European countries are all yellow.
Yes. It's puzzling for me too, and we have a Jibo paper on that. But I can say a couple of things about that.
Yes, please.
Okay, so thank you very much for your comments and suggestions. And this is a work in progress, so we haven't submitted it yet. So now I think now is the moment to clarify things, and maybe if it's necessary to explain better certain things in the paper, now is the moment to do that. So there were 4 comments. Let me start to remember. Okay, the first one. I guess the first comment, your first comment, I will answer that. Everything goes back to why we build models and what is the purpose of building models. So I try to see models as a way of telling a story and somehow guaranteeing that the story is intrinsically consistent, because otherwise the math is wrong. So that's my approach to modeling. And what we try to do here is to study certain channels that are being presented in the literature and try to understand which channel is leading to which result and how these results could eventually be connected to general stylized facts that we observe without doing enough econometrics, just more visual data. And we have a set of 5 channels that allow that allowed to reproduce certain stylized facts with what, in my opinion, is an honest differentiation between formal and informal activities, meaning the formal sector is much more energy intensive because it's capital intensive relatively to the informal sector. They are relatively disconnected. The informal sector has low productivity, which is constant. And these are elements that are present in the model. Now, if you tell me that, in your opinion, the climate change problem in developing countries is much more related to deforestation, I would agree with you that that deforestation is a big problem, especially for countries like Brazil that have a huge tropical forest. And I think the model is sufficiently tractable to allow to introduce other elements. Deforestation is one of them. I presented a paper a couple of times, and sometimes the audience raises the gender element because male, female have different approaches to perceptions of climate change. So these are elements that I feel that the model is sufficiently flexible to allow the introduction of other channels and remove channels that you might not think that are important. So okay, so that was I think that addresses your first comment. Now the second comment about structuralism and structuralism not caring on what people think, we could debate that over coffee, but the original writings of the structuralist authors, definitely they didn't have much on culture and the way minds work. But the last writings by Furtado, for example, they highlight a lot the cultural element and the need, for example, of sovereign culture. And so I would say that the late Furtado, or the last years of Furtado, he was Minister of Culture in his last phase. So he was also interested in somehow in heterogeneity in ecological thinking, or heterogeneity in thinking. He didn't call it that way, but that's something different. I will end my reply to your second point there. But about what Giulio asked, the channel that we have in mind, connecting informality and green attitudes, is kind of is very much close to the hierarchy of needs literature. So the idea that your needs have a hierarchy and you try to satisfy first your basic needs, and later on, environmental concerns will be some sort of luxury good. Yeah. So I would. That's the motivation. So if you work in the formal sector, your basic needs would be somehow satisfied. So this will increase the probability that you will care about the environment. That's the mechanism we have in mind. Now, we try to refer to the literature on that in the paper, but of course we can debate the relevance of that literature. But that's, in defense of the model, that's kind of the reasoning or the rationale that we had in mind. Mm-hmm. It's a direct effect. Sì? Sì? Sì. Yes.
The green leadership, there are also some other channel that characterize even, like for instance,
You want a direct channel from income to attitudes?
We cannot have a last conversation.
Finally.
An idea what channel for the income it's a question. Was just a question of the question.
Just the question.
Okay, the question is clear, at least to me.
The question was not clear to me over coffee. And then I don't remember Zeta's point. Zeta. What was your point?
Sweden.
Oh yeah, Sweden. So for the Nordic countries, we can only speculate. When I present the paper, some colleagues speculated maybe it's because there is this sort of feeling that because they are close to the North Pole, somehow they could benefit from climate change. Because like Russia, many areas that right now you cannot occupy, you will be able to explore minerals, or you'll be able to explore for agriculture. We could also speculate that it's because since they are already developed, maybe they have a strong faith in technology, and they think that it's not a big deal because eventually we'll create a technology that overcomes that. Whatever explanation we give to that, in my opinion, brown colors are unjustifiable. So we could have marginal differences in this picture. I'm perfectly fine that the Nordics maybe are light green and Italy is strong green, but brown, we shouldn't have brown. And the fact that we have coexistence of brown and green colors, for me, it speaks about heterogeneity in ecological thinking. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, now it's the turn of Chiara Grazzini. We are losing 5 to 10 minutes every turn. I'm sorry. Okay, 20 minutes. Okay. Maybe the presentation. Good afternoon. Today I present the work about the impact of the environmental policy on the international green competitiveness, but analyzing the moderating effect of the complexity index and the pollution intensity. We can start from the conceptual framework of the work, because when you consider the climate change, nowadays we have to combine two different problems. From one hand, we have the problem of the climate change, but at the same time, we have the problem to ensure an inclusive, just transition. So the Guarini and Oreiro in 2023 proposed the ecological structural change as a viable solution to the environmental and social challenges, but for starting the transformation of the production system, for shifting the inputs, the labor, the capital from the traditional sector to the modern ones, we need, in particular, when we want to shift the input for improving the performance, the environmental performance of our production system, we need a more proactive role of the institution and the public policies. It is in particular important if you consider the developing country that where the ecological transformation is more difficult because they suffer of a premature industrialization process, because they increase their resilience on the production, the export of primary goods and low-tech technologies. And but in particular, for sustaining the ecological transition, we need of an ecological structural change, but also a technological structural change based on the diffusion of the eco-innovation, because the eco-innovation generates more efficient process, improve the productivity and environmental performance, and can create a competitive advantages for companies. But the technological and the market pull factor are not sufficient for starting this virtuous cycle. So we need more stringent environmental policies. But in the literature, we can identify two opposite positions. We have the pollution heaven hypothesis, and in the other part, we have the Porter hypothesis. If we consider the first one, so we consider the pollution heaven hypothesis, the environmental regulation is considered an additional cost because the company have to shift financial resources, labor, or other inputs to the to the reduction, the pollution, the improvement of the environmental performance. So this fact can reduce their profitability and reducing their international competitiveness. So the environmental regulation is considered an obstacle to the international competitiveness, and the pollution heaven hypothesis suggests that the polluting industries can relocate the polluting activity in countries that are characterized by a lower stringency of the environmental regulation.
On the contrary, we have the Porter hypothesis that suggests the environmental regulation is an incentive for the diffusion of the the technology and the diffusion of the eco innovation. So the eco innovation can represent a win-win strategies for sustaining the ecological transition and an inclusive growth. And in particular, this was formalized by the Porter van der Leest that identified three different versions of the Porter hypothesis. In the first one is the weak version that suggests that simply a stringent environmental regulation can sustain the diffusion of the innovation. Then we have the narrow version because we can identify different kind of environmental policies. So they suggest that the more flexible environmental instrument, such as the market instrument, we can consider taxes, subsidies, can improve the environmental performance of firms by stimulating the adoption innovation. And finally, we have the strong version of the Porter hypothesis. The environmental regulation sustain the diffusion of the environmental innovation. The firms can improve the environmental performance, and times the introduction of the eco-innovation can generate competitive advantages for such firm. And in particular, if we consider the work of Costantini and Mazzanti of 2012, they want to explore the validity of the Porter hypothesis in the European context, and analyzing this hypothesis, they suggest two different, verify the strong version of the Porter hypothesis, identify an overall effect of the environmental policies on the international competitiveness of the manufacturing sector export, but in particular they propose a strictly strong version. The environmental policy, in particular, the instruments that are targets for diffusing environmental innovation, can promote the green exports. This seems to sustain the general validity of the Porter hypothesis, but in the reality, Petroni et al. Suggests that we cannot consider a general validity of this hypothesis, but it depends by some circumstances, some characteristics of the country, and in particular in this work, they consider the pollution intensity, the level of pollution of country. And following test work, we want to test the moderating effect of the pollution intensity, because Petroni in 2019 identified that the most stringent environmental regulation can create a competitive advantage, in particular for the less polluting firm, because they can sustain a lower compliance cost. And but on the contrary, Fabrizio in 2024 identified a positive effect for the more polluting firms, because the polluting firms are more can drive more benefit, or can take more benefit from the ecological transition, and so the ecological conversion can be more profitable for the more polluting countries. But then we consider another moderating factors, because we consider the economic complexity. In the new development, the economic development is considered as a structural transformation of the productivity, the production system, in particular the transformation of the structure from a primary sector characterized by the exploitation of natural resources, of the commodity, to a modern sectors. So we can consider this modern sector as a sort of a sector that promotes the sophistication and the diversification of the production structure, that is characterized by higher complexity, so they can sustain the economic progress. But The technical transformation of the society require complex capability, complex knowledge. So the country require a higher quantity of knowledge, skills, and capabilities for produce and export a higher quantity of sophisticated and complex goods. And in particular, we can use the economic complexity index as a proxy of this kind of knowledge that are required for shifting from the primary sector to a more complex, sophisticated modern sector. So, and within this perspective, we can consider the ecological structural change as an ecological sophistication of the social, cultural, technological dimension, because higher economic complexity are today an higher investment in research and development can drive the green innovation. The engagement in green activity can create a competitive advantages for company for they can derive from the introduction of new green product or new market. So, and in particular, the green product that are characterized by more complexity, require more interdisciplinary knowledge, so are considered as more complex goods. But we know the positive effect of the economic complexity, but sometimes there is no evidence about the moderating effect of the economic complexity on the impact on the environmental regulation on international competitiveness. So we want to verify the validity of the strictest version of the water hypothesis introduced by Costantini and Mazzanti, but also we want to verify if there exists a single moderating effect of the pollution intensity and the economic complexity, and also if there exists a possible joint effect of the economic complexity and the environmental regulation on the international green competitiveness. We use the OECD database that contain a lot of variables related to the environmental issue. In particular, we consider the period that starts from 1990 to 2016 because it's the last day of the last year of the availability of the data about the environmental export, and we consider 40 OECD countries. As I said before, the dependent variable that represents the green international competitiveness is the environmental good export market share, and the model control for the environmental stringency policy index, that is index proposed by the OECD that give a range that come from 0 to 6 and measure the stringency of the environmental regulation at the national level. And it is particularly useful, this index, because we have a composite index being decomposed into different components related to market, non-market, and measure that support the introduction of the clear energy technologies. We consider the economic complexity index as a proxy of the sophistication and the diversification of the production structure that represent the knowledge, the touch knowledge, and the skills acquired by the country. And also we control for the total greenhouse emission that is used as a proxy of the pollution intensity. We control for the real exchange rate and the world GDP. And in particular, to analyze the impact of this variable on the international competition, we used the GLS, generally square estimator, that allow us for controlling for the heteroscedasticity and the serial correlation. And in particular, we show you two equations. In the first one, we consider the single effect of the PS, but also the moderating effect of the economic complexity index. And in the second one, we consider the single effect of the economic complexity, the pollution intensity, but also we introduce the interaction term between the APS, the economic complexity index, and the pollution intensity. Starting from the first table, I know that it's difficult to read this table, but I want to share the main results. all the equation show that the baseline model is significant at 1%. So the baseline model is robust. So the real exchange rate show a positive effect. So the valuation of the real exchange rate enhance the price competitiveness. And at the same time, the world GDP also has a positive effect because, as said before, Marvin, the green products are considered as a luxury good. So when the level of income increase, people will require a higher quantity of green product. So it is a positive effect on the environmental export. But the main
isn't it the share of work?
Sì,
Can
yes,
you explain better your dependent variable?
the dependent variable is an environmental good export market share.
Of which country? Of one country?
Of one country, yeah. See, the
market for environmental
on the mean, the mean.
Of the mean of what?
So within.
Huh?
No, the OECD average.
So Italy increased its export of green good with respect to European mean. Okay.
The share market share. They divide on the mean.
The mean, the European mean for each period or over a long period of time?
No, only the dependent variable.
The effect of the increasing world GDP should not show up, no?
Is world GDP.
Oh, okay, so the European mean increases.
Only this case is no, sorry.
Because
I made a mistake. Sorry. It's not an issue. It's a value.
No, market share on the mean.
Because since it is a share, however you measure, wouldn't be affected by the level of world GDP. Because if it increases the market for environmental good, it increases it for everybody. So the share shouldn't be affected by the level. This is a first. So it was just, let's go on. We can discuss it later.
Okay, but the first table suggests, supportano the results identified by Petroni et al. We cannot consider general validity of the Porter hypothesis, but it depends by the circumstances because the index of the stringency of environmental regulation is not significant alone, but become positive and significant when we introduce the interaction with the economic complexity. So this means and also they become positive and significant when we consider the lag of 3 and 5 years. This means that the green policy need time for being effective because the consumers have to change completely their consumption habit, but at the same time the industries that introduce the environmental innovation need time for introducing technology, starting to produce the new product and obtain a competitive advantages. As I suggested before, the economic complexity represents an important variable that drives the international competitiveness because this represents used as a proxy of the knowledge, the skills acquired by the company, and in particular the green products, the green export require more complex interdisciplinary capabilities and knowledge. And a more complex production structure increase the capacity of the country to produce and export diversified products, in particular green product. But also is important moderating variable. So we consider if we introduce a more stringent environmental regulation, a more complex economies, we can accelerate the ecological conversion of the production structure. And sometimes we can create competitive advantages for our companies. Then we consider the second table related to the second equation. We can identify a significant effect of the pollution intensity of the international green competitiveness. In particular, we confirm the results obtained by Fabrizio et al. In 2024 that suggests that the positive effect of the environmental regulation is more significant for the more polluting countries, and particularly for the more polluted field, because they can obtain higher benefit from the ecological conversion. But sometimes also we can identify significant joint moderating effect of the pollution intensity, the economic complexity on the international green competitiveness. So because a complex economy possess the capability, the technology for producing green products, and to introduce green technology that allow to improve the environmental performance, reducing their greenhouse emission. So also complex economy produce more complex sophisticated goods, so they can have competitive advantages. So the combination of economic complexity and the stringent environmental policy can represent a winning strategy for sustaining the ecological transition, the ecological structural change that is based on the green sophistication and diversification of the product structure. So to conclude, I think. The paper identified a possible interaction between the stringent environmental regulation and the international competitiveness, but I suggest that we cannot consider a general validity of the Porter Report. We have to analyze the circumstances, the particular characteristics of the country. So they have to, the policymakers have to promote investment that facilitate transition to a diversified economic structure and sophisticated green goods production. So because creating a more complex, sophisticated production structure allows also to increase the economic resilience and enhance the international competitiveness of our country. But at the same time, the green innovation and the green product are more complex, are more sophisticated, are more diversified, so they require interdisciplinary knowledge. So they need of international cooperation, but also the creation of links network between heterogeneous stakeholders. So, and in particular, the country that export complex industrial policy and industrial products are characterized by an higher or present international competitive advantage, but at the same time are characterized by a more social equality. So the diversification and sophistication of economy can represent also a strategy for obtaining the structural change for required by the CEPAL. So I can conclude. So this is the limitation and pressure reserve, because we want to enlarge the samples and continue to analyze the effect.
Questions? No, the discussant.
Do you want the mic?
Puoi prendere questo senza ascoltare, a meno che non vuoi passeggiare mentre parlo.
Thank you, Chiara, for a very interesting presentation, a very interesting paper. You have my comments in writing. So here I will just mention two things, maybe suggestions in terms of one more in form and another more in content in the econometrical part. Mm-hmm. So the most substantial maybe are the econometrics. I would encourage you guys to maybe treat a little bit more careful the time that you're using, the time period that you're using for all variables, just to be sure that you control or you avoid for a reverse causality, because right now all your variables are in T, and even when you introduce lags, the lags interact with variables that are in T. And I think it makes perfectly sense that higher economic complexity leads to environmental exports, but you could also make the opposite case. Higher environmental exports are increasing your economic complexity. The same thing for the EPS. Higher environmental stringency increases environmental exports, but you might just adopt legislation that is environmentally stringent because you already have an advantage, an initial advantage in terms of environmental exports. So just to be careful with the lags and try to bring more robustness to these econometrics, both in terms of control variables, because right now you really don't have many standard macro controls, human capital, capital stock, this kind of degree of openness, this kind of controls, and also in terms of robustness in terms of estimators, because you're using just one estimator, and you could explore that avenue. In terms of form, the paper connects ecological structural change with Porter hypothesis and with economic complexity. And I like very much that. Maybe I would suggest to invert the order of the presentation, because right now you're starting with ecological structural change, and then you get to Porter hypothesis and economic complexity. So the reader gets the idea that your paper is about ecological structural change, but your paper is really about Porter's hypothesis and economic complexity, which have everything to do with new developmentalism and so on and so forth. But maybe you can start, my goal is Porter hypothesis and blah, and I also contribute to the literature on, and I think selling the paper might be easier in that way. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment, for the suggestion. So we are trying to introduce a more robustness check. So by changing the control variable, also we introduce, for example, another indicator for the economic complexity. We just, for example, we try to estimate the same regression using the fitness complexity that is proposed by the World Bank. Also, we introduce a control variable, not only the greenhouse emission on GDP, but also the greenhouse emission per capita, or a dummy for developing country, because we have 40 OECD countries. So also we have a dummy, but also we use a categorical variable that we divide by emerging, developed, and transitioning. Not here, we are testing, but
well, thank you very much for Chiara and Giulio for such an interesting paper. Well, I don't have a comment, but a suggestion for future research is to analyze not only the impact of exports, but also for imports. Just to analyze what will be the general impact of this kind of environmental regulation, because you are only analyzing what will be the behavior on exports. But if you want to analyze the impact of environmental regulation on economic activity, you must focus on imports. Just for instance, to put an example, to understand, for instance, the current impact that the environmental regulation is having, for instance, for certain economic activities like in Europe, like, for instance, the metallurgical industry, or, for instance, the automotive industry. And where we are detecting that this regulation, what is having an impact, clear impact, not as much, well, for instance, in terms of the production of the automotive industry is declining, but what we are generating is instead an increase in the imports of such activity. This is important from a long-term perspective, because if this kind of regulation is leading to or is generating a rising in the imports, for instance, say, of electrical vehicles from China, this creates a problem for the economic activity in the long term, because we can be facing the problem, a threat for the shrinking of this important economic activity.
No. Thank you for
my suggestion.
For the suggestion, because we are focused.
To consider the impact of the net export. Yes, thank you so much for this suggestion.
Quickly to the online contribution. If I know how to do it, I'm not sure.
We have to
Now, please, Professor Marchetti, you can start, perhaps share your slides if you have.
Forse
I have the slides,
ma spegnere la nostra.
I cannot share.
Interrompi condivisione, vai su interrompi
It's not
condivisione.
allowed for me to share.
Okay, now
No,
Eh?
now you. Ah, gli devo abilitare qua.
because here I cannot share. I can have to change the,
No, you should, have you open your microphone?
yes.
Oh,
Ma infatti lo sentiamo. No, it's okay. But can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
sì.
Are you listen to me? Are you able to listen me?
Senti, scusa, ti dispiace andare, uscire e chiedere a Luigi Salvati? Dove lo vedi? Dove lo modifico questa autorizzazione?
Quello è il file da condividere?
No, lo deve condividere lui da remoto. E questo signore qui lo deve condividere.
Ok.
C'è qualcosa che gli impedisce di condividerlo?
No?
You should be able to share your slides from your PC, from your device.
No, I'm not allowed here to share the slides.
Adesso perché
Adesso.
sentire la...
No,
Questo
we
è
can do
la
that.
diretta su YouTube. Adesso dovrebbe sempre condividere.
Just a second. Now we can do that. Just a minute. Share, include this on. Okay, let's try.
Comunque adesso l'ho impostato come relatore, quindi devo poterlo fare.
Ecco,
Ok.
speriamo che ci riesca.
Hello.
Condiviso qualcosa.
For the moment, we only see a black thing.
Okay, I sent before the section started, I sent the paper with the presentation. I sent the presentation by mail. Perhaps you could.
We also don't hear you well, so maybe you should do something with your microphone.
Okay.
You have to open your file and then select it as something to be shared.
Okay, I will try to.
Either share the screen or upload, share the document. Yeah, you have to open.
Okay, just a second. I'm trying here. Are you listening to me?
Si sente anche malissimo. Dipende da lui. Questo cattivo audio dipende.
Sorry. Are you listening to me or no?
Yes, we can hear you not very well, so perhaps you should stay closer to your microphone or increase the volume, I don't know. But we don't see PowerPoint or whatever.
Okay, I'm trying to share here the PowerPoint. It seems there is a problem here.
You can share the screen in order to show us the.
Yes,
First open your slides and then share the screen.
I'm trying to do that, but I have some problem here that I don't know if it's on the internet or in my computer.
Dica di togliere la condivisione e di farla di nuovo scegliendo il documento che ha aperto.
You can close the sharing they suggest you close the sharing and then open again, choosing the document you have opened.
Okay, I'm trying to do that, but just a second, please. Sorry for this problem. I don't know what is happening here. Perhaps I could just speak about the paper.
Just close your sharing the document, whatever you did with the system. I think dove stanno gli comandi? Qui dove sono scritti i puntini?
Questo qua, condividi.
So on the upper right of your screen, you have share, condividi in Italian, share. You
Yes.
should close the sharing. Whatever you're sharing now, you should stop and then start again the sharing.
I'm trying to do that, but it's not working.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
We send the presentation by email, and then we charge the presentation notebook.
Ma quale email? Which email? We don't have any mail of the room.
Mia.
Oh, I will stop the sharing here.
Cosa non lo può mettere?
Okay, I will stop the sharing here.
Can you post your slides in the chat? Come fa a mettere il documento?
The chat is not allowed for me to send anything through the chat.
Can you please upload your PowerPoint in the chat and we will try to share it?
The problem is that right now I'm not allowed to share anything on the chat. The chat is closed for me.
La chat è disattivata per questa riunione. Ok, wait a sec.
No, ma Davide Romagnello non c'ha.
But I can talk about the paper without the PowerPoint.
Qual è questa qui?
Non so, special session. No, non è special session, mi pare. Questa come si chiama?
Vabbè, vediamo se.
La sessione si chiama no, sì.
Vabbè, questo.
Quello lì special session, sì.
Sì. Tempo mettere esattare
Chat della riunione attivata. Ok, sì. Adesso dovrebbe essere attiva.
So now you should be able to share, to upload your PowerPoint in the chat.
Però potrebbe pure riprovare a condividere.
Or you try again to share it through the sharing thing.
Okay, I will try to send you by the chat here. How I do that? I never use Teams. It's my problem. I always have problems using Teams.
Chiede come fa a mandare il PowerPoint.
Drag and drop.
You should just drag it and drop it in the chat.
Okay. Second.
Solo 5 minuti nella riunione. Perché rimangono solo 5 minuti nella riunione?
Per come è stata impostata.
Ma si può allungare.
Perhaps I could speak about the paper. You have just 5 minutes. And then I can give you basic ideas about the paper and then the section.
Did you are you the discussant? Who is the? Did you receive the paper? Okay. Okay, please go ahead.
Okay. First, I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference and the organizers of this section. The name of the paper is Investigating the Dynamics of the Profit Rate, Exchange Rate, and Terms of Trade in Brazil. The basic idea is to understand how exchange rate and terms of trade shape the profit rate. The paper is built on a decomposition of the profit rate to look at the profit rate in terms of the profit share, potential capital output ratio, and capacity utilization. The basic idea is that the exchange rate has an impact.
Così lo vediamo meglio, almeno lo vediamo.
Are you listening to me?
Yes, we're listening.
Are you listening to me?
Yes, we see you on the big screen.
And you are listening?
You should try to stay close to the microphone.
Okay, I will try. Now it's better?
Mi può mandare a lei?
Sì, se la mette su pennetta.
The basic idea is to see how the exchange rate and the terms of trade affect the profit rate through its determinants.
Okay, we have a proposal here. Since you have the email address of Chiara Grazzini, you could send her your PowerPoint and she can then save it on a USB pen and then we can show it, maybe.
I sent the PowerPoint before the section. I already did that.
Ha detto che te l'ha mandato prima della sessione. So she's checking.
Okay.
Okay, just wait a minute so we can see your
Okay. Okay, thank you. And sorry for that.
Mettetelo sulla penna.
Tanto lui la vede, no? Presentazione.
Sì, adesso condividiamo.
Ci stanno diverse equazioni. Vedo che è difficile sapere.
Sì, no, poi già si sente malissimo, almeno.
Facciamo così.
Lasciamo lui di lato, così si vede quelli che si faccia mentre parla, anche sullo schermo. Si vede.
Ok.
Ok, thank you.
Però facciamo vedere anche lui sullo schermo, si prende il focus, come si fa qui?
Ma adesso stiamo condividendo un altro.
Adalmi, when you want that I skip the slides?
Yes,
You
please,
can say.
please.
Reporter. Questa sono io.
No, ma c'è qualcosa. No, reporter no, è un'altra cosa. Ah, perché stiamo condividendo noi?
Sì.
E
Vabbè.
quindi niente, soltanto perché. Però adesso stiamo condividendo il contenuto del. Non si può fare così.
Ok.
That's okay.
Adalmi, can you start?
Okay, thank you. Then the paper is a joint paper. It has this title, Investigating the Dynamics of Profit Rate, Exchange Rate, and Terms of Trade in Brazil. Please, the next. The basic idea is to see how the exchange rate and the terms of trade shape the profit rate, affect the profit rate. And the paper and the model that you see is based on the decomposition of the profit rate by Weisskopf, who has a famous paper. And when he makes the decomposition of the profit rate in the profit share, potential capital output ratio, and capacity utilization. The basic argument is that the exchange rate has a nonlinear effect on the profit rate because an exchange rate devaluation raises the profit share and reduce the potential output capital ratio. An exchange rate appreciation declines the profit share and raises the capital output ratio. Then the exchange rate has a nonlinear effect on the profit share, depending on which movement is stronger, It is the rise of the profit share or decline of the potential capital output ratio. The terms of trade rise the profit rate by rising the profit share and the potential capital output ratio. Please. The next one, please.
Okay, this is the next.
Yes. We use this model to look at what happened in the Brazilian economy between 2000 and 2023. We employ a local regression that is non-parametric technique. And you also employ exchange rate and direct quotation as you employ in Brazil. And an increase in the exchange rate means that you have a depreciation of the exchange rate. The key contribution is to look at the profit rate, looking at the effects of the exchange rate in terms of trade in the profit rate. That is a novelty in the literature that we are employing in the paper that is based on classical Markov framework. Next, please. Here you have the definition of the profit rate. The profit rate is defined as profits, as the ratio between profits and total advanced capital. And you have here the decomposition of Weisskopf, that we can see the profit rate as the multiplication between the profit share, the potential output capital ratio, and the level of capacity utilization. Here you have the equations that shows how the exchange rate and the terms of trade influence the profit share. The influence goes through the effects of both exchange rate and terms of trade has a nominal wage and GDP deflator. Please go ahead. I will try to the basic idea is that exchange rate devaluation rise the profit share because the effect on the GDP deflator is higher than in nominal wage. GDP deflator has a higher number of tradable goods than the nominal wage. And the higher the terms of trade, the higher the profit share. Please go ahead. And here you have how the exchange rate and terms of trade affect the potential output capital ratio. Here the basic idea is that exchange rate and terms of trade affect the price of capital goods at higher velocity than the GDP deflator. And here it's interesting to show that the potential output capital ratio, it depends on the relative price of GDP divided by the price of capital goods. Please go ahead. Go ahead, because then I showed you. Go ahead, please. Here, I sum up the equations. How exchange rate affects the profit rate. And the evaluated exchange rate corresponds to higher profit share, but lower potential output capital ratio. Then when you has the devaluation of the exchange rate, the profit share rise, but the potential output capital declines because the price of capital goods grows faster than the GDP deflator. When you have an overvalued exchange rate, you have the opposite. And the result of this combination is that you have a nonlinear relationship between the exchange rate and the profit rate. The terms of trade rise the profit share and rise the potential output capital ratio. Then higher terms of trade implies a higher profit rate. And please go ahead. Then you look at the Brazilian data. The data source is a paper that I wrote. It was published last year. And the real exchange rate, the data source is the Brazilian Central Bank. The data for terms of trade is the FUNSEX, that is the Brazilian agents that takes care of the data on export and Brazilian imports. Please go ahead. Here you have the relationship between the real exchange rate and the profit rate. As you can see, there is and when the exchange rate is overvalued, the profit rate is higher. When the exchange rate is undervalued, the profit rate is high. You have a nonlinear U-shaped relationship between the real exchange rate and the profit rate. Why it's happened, you see. Here we have the profit rate and the terms of trade. Again, here we have a positive relationship between the terms of trade and the profit rate. Why when we have the overvalued exchange rate, we have a real exchange rate, we have a higher profit share and a higher profit rate, is that the growth rate of nominal wage is higher than the growth rate of GDP deflator. When the exchange rate is undervalued, the nominal wage grows at lower pace than the GDP deflator. It is a price mechanism. The next, please. The next. Oh, one behind, please. No, behind. One behind, please. Here we have the real exchange rate and the potential capital output ratio. You can see that when the exchange rate is overvalued, the capital output ratio is higher than when the exchange rate is undervalued. Why it happened? Because, again, you have this problem of price. When the exchange rate is overvalued, the GDP deflator grows faster than the price of capital goods. When the exchange rate is undervalued, the price of capital goods grow faster than the GDP deflator, then the relative price of declines and the output capital also declines and the profit rate declines. Next, please. Here you have the one back. Here you have the relationship between the terms of trade and the potential capital output ratio. When the terms of trade improves, the potential capital output ratio rise and the profit rate also rise.
You have 5 minutes at most.
Okay, we are going to the end. Next, please. Here you have the relationship between the exchange rate and the level of capacity utilization. The capacity utilization is higher when the exchange rate is undervalued because internal market is buying, is demand. The demand is based on wage and consumption of families. When the exchange rate is undervalued, the level of capacity utilization increases because exports increase more than imports. The external demand increase. Next, please. Again, here you have the terms of trade. We have again with when the terms of trade increase, we have both cases. Export increase and families, households increase their consumption and demand expand. Next, please. The problem is to look at the terms of trade and the real exchange rate at the same time is that the terms of trade has an important impact on the real exchange rate. When the terms of trade is low, the real exchange rate is undervalued. When the terms of trade is higher, the exchange rate is overvalued. Then the terms of trade has a direct effect on the profit rate and has an indirect effect on the profit rate through the exchange rate. Next, please. The final remarks. There is a nonlinear U-shaped relationship between the profit rate and the exchange rate. Devaluations may rise the profit share by increasing the GDP deflator more rapidly than the nominal wage. But on the other side, devaluation may reduce the potential output capital ratio as the price of capital goods rise faster than GDP deflator. The terms of trade also influence the profit rate, impacting the profit share, the potential capital output ratio, and capacity utilization, rising the three of them. But it also indirectly impacts the profit rate through its effects on the exchange rate. When you look at the Brazilian experience, higher terms of trade coupled with exchange rate appreciation allowed to expand the wage share and the profit rate in Brazil during the 2000s, but in the next decades, the opposite happened with important political consequences for Brazil. The basic, our point is that there are fundamental effects of the exchange rate and the terms of trade on the profit rate, capital accumulation, and economic growth that we still need a better understanding. We do not fully understand what are the joint effects of these variables on economic growth, distribution, capital accumulation is this paper is one first step on this direction. Thanks a lot for your patience. Thanks a lot for having me on the conference.
Oh, thanks you, Elmi, for the very interesting presentation and for the paper. Also, it's very interesting. It's full of the equation and empirical estimation. And just a curiosity, because in the paper you say that the profit rate increase for an improvement of the term of trade, a depreciation of the real exchange rate, but also for a combination of them. But when you analyze the effect of the term of trade, you identify a direct effect and indirect effect throughout the real exchange rate. In the last, my curiosity about the last empirical estimation, you consider only the direct effect of the improvement of term of trade and the depreciation of the real exchange rate, but also you consider a sort of the interaction term that allow for control for the direct and indirect effect of them.
When I was preparing now the presentation, the question that you rose came back to my mind. And I think that I have to spend more time and look back to equations to have a better look at these direct and indirect effects. Even we can think that depending on the kind of country, we have one effect dominating the other. I believe in Brazil that the direct effect dominates, but both effects are present. Here, I believe that econometrics would work better than the local regression. Perhaps to have a better idea of what was the direct and the indirect effect. Perhaps on the next paper, I will have to use econometrics instead of using local regression. That is a technique that offers the possibility of visualizing the data, but for this kind of interaction is not the best technique to.
Okay, simply a starting point for analyzing also the possible interaction. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So we can declare closed this section. Thank you to all participants. Thank you for having patience with the technical problems of online communications. Okay, good evening. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Obrigado, Roberto.
Obrigado. Thank you.